There's a moment in every collapse when the noise finally stops. Not the silence of peace, the silence of erasure. When Akhenaten died, Egypt stood in that void. The temples had been closed, the rituals abandoned, the names of the gods chiseled away. For nearly 2 decades, an entire civilization had been forced to forget its own soul. Aten's light had burned everything into a single blinding truth. But light, when it becomes absolute, leaves no room for shadow. And without shadow, there is no depth, no place for the unseen forces that hold a world together. When Amarna fell, the people didn't just lose a pharaoh. They lost the architecture of meaning itself. The old gods were gone, the new god had failed, and in that emptiness, something ancient began to stir. Not with fanfare, not with proclamations, with stillness, because the force that would restore Egypt was never meant to be seen. It was never a statue, never a manifest presence. It was the god whose very name meant the hidden one, Amun. Most Egyptian gods announced themselves. Ra blazed across the sky. Horus spread his wings. Anubis prowled the edge of death. They had forms, faces, stories carved into every wall. Amun had none of that. His name, Imn, translates to the concealed, the hidden, the one who cannot be known. He wasn't depicted as a jackal or a falcon. He wasn't tied to a single element or domain. When he was shown at all, it was as a man in simple robes, wearing a crown with 2 tall plumes, symbols not of identity, but of presence beyond form. He emerged quietly during the Middle Kingdom, a local deity in Thebes, but by the New Kingdom, he had become something far greater, not through conquest or mythological drama, but through a slow, inevitable recognition that the divine doesn't always reveal itself, that the deepest power is the one you cannot see. Amun represented the invisible foundation beneath all things, the breath before the word, the stillness before creation. He was the god of what cannot be grasped, only sensed, the part of existence that remains untouched by explanation. This wasn't unique to Egypt. Every tradition has touched this idea. The Tao that cannot be named, the formless Brahman, the Ein Sof of the Kabbalah. The presence felt in deep meditation, in the moment before sleep, in the center of a forest where no path leads. Amun was Egypt's way of saying the source is veiled, and it must remain so. Because once you make the divine entirely knowable, entirely graspable, you've already reduced it. Amun's rise wasn't loud, it was structural. As Thebes grew in power during the New Kingdom, so did its god, but Amun didn't replace the others. He absorbed them. Specifically, he merged with Ra, the solar deity, the face of cosmic order. The union became Amun-Ra, concealed and manifest, the unseen force and the illuminated rhythm of existence. It was a theological masterstroke. Ra gave structure, continuity, cosmic rhythm. Amun gave mystery, the infinite beneath the surface. Together, they formed the most complete expression of divinity Egypt had ever known. And with that came power, not just spiritual but political. The priests of Amun controlled vast estates, immense wealth, and the spiritual authority of the entire kingdom. Karnak, their temple complex in Thebes, became the largest religious structure in the ancient world. A labyrinth of columns that stretched for kilometers, each one carved with hymns to the concealed god. Walking through Karnak wasn't just a ritual act, it was a symbolic journey from the outer courts, bright and open, into the inner sanctum, where darkness gathered and only the high priest could enter. The architecture itself was transformative. The further you went, the less you could see. And that was the point. Stepping into those inner halls was like entering a different register of reality. The columns did not merely support stone, they shaped a path of perception. Light thinned until it felt almost tactile, a veil between the outer world and whatever waited in the sanctum. Every footstep echoed with an awareness the Egyptians knew instinctively, that approaching the divine was not about seeing more, but about learning to see less. Karnak was not a place of spectacle. It was a place where the senses surrendered, where certainty dissolved, and where the presence of the hidden god was felt not as an image, but as a pressure in the air, a quiet gravity drawing the soul inward. AMUN's sanctuaries were designed to withhold revelation, to remind the seeker that the divine begins where certainty ends. This was the spiritual order Akhenaten inherited, and it was this order he sought to destroy. Akhenaten didn't just reject the old gods, he rejected the very idea that divinity could be veiled. His revolution was simple: one god, one truth, one light. Aten, the solar disk, offering itself directly to all. No priests as intermediaries, no shrines in shadow, no ambiguity. It was radical transparency, divine clarity, a world where everything could be named. But in doing so, Akhenaten waged war on the concealed, and Amun was the concealed. He was the god whose power depended on remaining beyond reach. He was the opposite of Aten's open, blazing presence. This wasn't just a political conflict, it was a symbolic one, a confrontation between two modes of understanding the sacred. Aten said, "The divine is obvious. Look up, it's the sun." Amun said, "The divine is subtle. Look inward. It's the breath beneath your thoughts." Akhenaten's monotheism was the monotheism of the seen. It demanded that everything be brought into daylight, fixed, explained. There could be no ambiguity, no veiled altars, no unspoken truths. But Egypt had always understood that the soul needs both, that a civilization without mystery becomes hollow, that when everything is revealed, nothing feels sacred anymore. Amun was the guardian of that threshold, and Akhenaten tried to erase him. Akhenaten's city didn't survive him. Within a generation, Amarna was abandoned. The grand temples to Aten stood empty. The royal tombs were left unfinished. The experiment had failed, not just politically, but spiritually, because you cannot force a people to live without layers. The Egyptians didn't reject Aten because they were superstitious or backward. They rejected him because the new order had stripped away the dimensions of meaning that made life bearable. Without the old gods, the world felt flattened. Without Amun, there was no sense of something greater beyond what could be touched and named. The collapse wasn't a return to ignorance, it was a return to balance. Every culture that has tried to eliminate mystery has faced the same reckoning. When the Enlightenment made reason absolute, Romanticism erupted in response. When modernity tried to strip the world of enchantment, people turned to myth, to psychology, to fantasy. What is pushed away always resurfaces. Because we are not built for permanent clarity. We need spaces where meaning can form without being immediately defined, where questions can exist without answers, where the soul can rest in not knowing. Amarna fell because it had tried to live in permanent noon, and no one can sustain that. When Akhenaten died, the old rhythms returned, not as chaos, but as restored complexity. He was 9 years old when he became pharaoh. Born Tutankhamun, living image of Aten, he inherited a broken kingdom. The temples were in ruins, the priesthood scattered, the people adrift. Guided by advisors, particularly the powerful Eye and General Horemheb, the boy king made a choice that would define his reign. He changed his name. Tutankhaten became Tutankhamun. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a declaration. The old order would return. The concealed god would rise again. Immediately the temples were reopened, the statues restored, the priests reinstated, the rituals resumed. The Restoration Stela, one of the most important inscriptions of his reign, describes the moment. The temples of the gods and goddesses were fallen into decay. Their shrines were desolate, the land was in confusion. The gods had turned their backs on this land. But now, under Tutankhamun, His Majesty has restored what was ruined and raised up what had gone to pieces. This wasn't nostalgia, it was repair. The young pharaoh understood, or his advisors understood, that Egypt could not function without its spiritual infrastructure. Without the gods, there was no Maat. Without Maat, there was no order. And at the center of that restoration was Amun. The boy king gave him back his temples, his priesthood, his authority. Karnak was refurbished. Thebes reclaimed its place as the spiritual heart of Egypt. The veiled center returned. Tutankhamun didn't conquer enemies or expand borders. He restored complexity, and that was enough. What happened under Tutankhamun wasn't just political reversal. It was symbolic reintegration. The return of Amun meant the return of the concealed dimension of existence. Egypt once again had two worlds, the manifest and the unmanifest, the spoken and the unspoken, the light of day and the sanctum at dusk. Maat, cosmic order, depends on this duality. It's not enough to have laws and rituals. There must also be mystery. There must be something that cannot be fully articulated, only felt. Amun's restoration was the restoration of that inner temple, the part of reality that language can't touch, the part of the self that remains unknown even to itself. The Egyptians understood that a world without an inner chamber becomes emotionally thin. Rituals might continue, symbols might remain, but something essential collapses when everything is exposed. Mystery is not an accessory to spirituality. It is the structure that allows meaning to breathe. A society that forgets its hidden dimension loses the ability to interpret its own experiences. The return of Amun restored that crucial balance, an acknowledgement that truth has layers and that the deepest ones can only be approached through reverence, patience, and the willingness to stand before what cannot be simplified. Sacred traditions across the world have always understood this. The mysteries of Eleusis, the inner chambers of Masonic lodges, the silent retreats of monastics, all are built on the same principle, that profound knowledge cannot be given directly. It must be approached through obscurity, through unknowing. Egypt's civilization had been founded on this understanding, and when Akhenaten tried to eliminate it, the culture collapsed inward. The return of Amun was the return of that structure, the return of the idea that some truths are too deep for daylight. Amun isn't just an ancient deity, he's an archetype, the hidden power. What remains unacknowledged gathers force in the dark. This is true psychologically, spiritually, politically. The shadow self, in Jungian terms, is composed of everything we refuse to recognize, and the more we deny it, the more it governs us from behind the curtain. Amun represents the opposite approach, acknowledgement of the unseen, not fear of it, but reverence, because the most essential things form in obscurity. Ideas crystallize in solitude. Identity takes shape in private reflection. Spiritual experience happens in the inner sanctum, not the public square. Even fear, when left unexamined, becomes an unnamed force, dictating choices without ever being confronted. Amun teaches that what cannot be seen is not the enemy. It's the foundation, the breath beneath the word, the pause between thoughts, the stillness where clarity emerges. When Akhenaten tried to make everything transparent, he flattened the world. When Tutankhamun brought Amun back, he brought back the possibility of dimension. This is why Amun endured. Not because he was the loudest or the most dramatic, but because he reflected the way the soul actually works. We are layered beings. We need gods who honor that. Tutankhamun reigned for only 10 years. He died at 19. We don't know how. Theories range from illness to injury to assassination. His body shows signs of malaria, a broken leg, genetic disorders from royal inbreeding. But no single cause has been confirmed. What we do know is this: his tomb was the only royal burial in the Valley of the Kings found nearly intact. When Howard Carter opened it in 1922, the world saw what had been sealed for over 3,000 years. Gold, chariots, statues, a sarcophagus of unimaginable beauty, and the golden mask, perhaps the most iconic image of ancient Egypt. But the real treasure wasn't the gold, it was the preservation. The fact that this boy king, who accomplished so little in political terms, became immortal in death. His tomb became a time capsule, a whisper from the past that somehow survived. It's fitting. Because Tutankhamun's legacy was never about conquest or grandeur, it was about what he restored. He gave Egypt back its veiled center, and in doing so, he ensured that when his name was finally spoken again, it would carry the weight of something far greater than himself. He was the pharaoh who brought back the concealed god, and in the end, he became concealed too, sealed away, waiting to be found. Aten burned too brightly. He offered no refuge, no gradation, no room for the unspoken. Amun prevailed because he understood something Aten didn't, that the world needs layers. That meaning comes from what is not said as much as what is. That power, when it refuses to show itself, becomes limitless. This is the paradox of the concealed god. The less you grasp him, the more present he becomes. The more you try to define him, the further he recedes. And that recession is not absence, it's fullness. Amun's victory wasn't a defeat of enlightenment, it was a rebalancing. Amun prevailed because he embodied a truth older than Egypt itself, that the sacred lives in the space between revelation and concealment. A god who shows everything becomes a concept. Our god who hides everything becomes a void, but a god who reveals only enough to awaken longing, that God becomes a mystery the soul can grow toward. Amun existed in that threshold. He offered presence without exposure, meaning without finality. In him, divinity stayed alive, dynamic, capable of expanding with the imagination rather than being locked into a single definition. A reminder that clarity without ambiguity is sterile, that form without formlessness has no soul. Egypt needed both, the manifest sun and the breath behind it, Ra and Amun, order and mystery. And when Tutankhamun restored that balance, he didn't just save a religion, he saved a way of being in the world, a way that honors the unknown, that builds temples to what cannot be named, that refuses to reduce the sacred to what can be controlled. Amun's return was the return of that reverence, and it endured for 1,000 years more, until Egypt itself faded into history. But even then, the idea remained, the hidden one, the god who never needed to be seen. Because what is truly sacred always lives just beyond the edge of sight. Egypt survived because it remembered the concealed. When Akhenaten tried to burn away the mystery, the civilization fractured. When Tutankhamun brought it back, the fracture healed. Not perfectly, not immediately, but enough. Amun became the thread that held the kingdom together for centuries, the quiet center, the unseen king. But there is one more mystery, one more figure that guards the threshold between worlds, one more presence that has watched Egypt rise and fall and has never spoken a word. It sits at the edge of the desert, half buried in sand, its face worn by millennia. It has no name carved into its base, no inscription to explain its purpose, no mythology to frame its meaning. And yet, for 4,500 years, it has been there, watching, waiting, the Sphinx. If you want to understand the final secret of Egypt, the place where all the symbols converge, you have to look at the one thing that was never meant to be understood, only encountered. Next time, the Sphinx. If you enjoyed this Egyptian journey, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next episode. The mystery of the Sphinx. This is Beyond Mythology.